Minute, and you are now live.
Okay. Thank you.
Why don't I open up the meeting?
Okay.
This is Senate Appropriations Committee, and we are going to have testimony related to the Vermont State College study that has been submitted and obviously has some very significant budgetary connections. So with that, I would like to ask Senator Baruth to introduce our witness and any background that he wants to provide the committee as we focus on this particular area of budgetary need.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So to refresh people's memories who might be on YouTube, ex-Chancellor Spalding some months back made a proposal to close 3 campuses of the state colleges. There was universal outcry, and the leadership of the House and the Senate and the money committees in both chambers stepped in and helped through that crisis with bridging funds and also the creation of a select committee on higher education. The select committee was structured in a very particular way with a steering group, and that steering group's first job was to put out an RPF and or RFP and hire a consulting group, and they found NCHEMS, a great group with a great record, and Brian Prescott is with us. Where we stand right now in the process, just to cut to the chase, is NCHEMS has drafted a report which the select committee has been through twice now. We approved it for release on December 4th. We've now been through an update, but I believe the version that the committee has is the December 4th version. But the only thing I'll say before Brian starts is that the very first thing we did was to try to define the state's needs and what it seeks in return for the investment it makes. And among those things, we determined that we wanted the presence of a state college, an institution of higher education in every region of the state, i.e. we were recommending that these 3 campuses not be closed, although as you'll see from the presentation, there's a recommendation to reduce the footprint and the administrative bureaucracy, et cetera, but trying to keep the Northeast Kingdom online with a physical presence as well as Randolph Center. So with that said, I'll turn it over to Brian Prescott, who I believe is Vice President of NCHEMS, to go through the report.
Thank you. Do you just want to introduce yourself for the record, Mr. Prescott?
Sure. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I have routine problems with being heard on Zoom and also in my household sometimes. But anyway, my name is Brian Prescott. I'm the Vice President for the National Center for Higher Education Management Systems, better known as NCHEMS. And we are a nonprofit 501c3 small organization located in Boulder, Colorado. And we, by way of a little bit more introduction, we've been involved in statewide strategic engagements around post-secondary education at some point or other in pretty much every state in the country. And in recent years, we've been helping some other states try to address problems that are not dissimilar to the ones that are being confronted in Vermont. And so we are pleased to be the consultant that was selected to help the select committee do its work. And thank you for the introduction, Senator Baruth, and for your engagement throughout the process so far in the development of this work. I would say my instructions are to try to outline what was in the December report briefly and leave time for questions, and I'll do my best to do that. By way of a little bit more process, I would say the December 4th report that you have was the one that we created with considerable involvement from the select committee and the steering group of the select committee. It was also informed by a pretty extensive analysis of available data, both publicly available and data supplied by the Chancellor's Office, as well as from UVM and BSAC. And we have also, with the help of the New England Board of Higher Education, been involved in pretty extensive stakeholder engagement activities with the unions, with members of concerned interest groups and communities, and so forth. We have consulted reports and studies that are relevant, most especially the Treasurer's Report and the report produced by Jim Page, which I think you all are all familiar with, but also the work that was done by organizations like NVU Thrive, the board itself, and BCSC Thrive. Sorry, NVU Strong. And then, as I mentioned, we've worked intensively with the Select Committee to develop the recommendations, as well as the criteria for solutions that I'm here to sort of provide an overview of with you today. The December report is just the first of three we are required, or the Select Committee is required to produce. The next one will be a refinement of that report, and Senator Bruce referenced adjustments that we are still working on with the Select Committee in advance of that next report, which is due in mid-February, and then a final report due in April. So it's been a whirlwind process for everyone involved, not least of all me, but we've been pleased to, as I said, pleased to be involved in it. The conclusions that I think all of the work that the analysis that we did leads to, a not surprising conclusion that transformation is critical and urgent, and that in order to be, for it to take hold and be successful, there will be a substantial requirement for state support. If you'll indulge me, I will be referencing a little of the document on my other screen as we talk. If I can figure out which one I'm looking for right now. And so in the report that we provided, there's the report that we are continuing to work on, I'll just preview just real briefly. There's a growing sense of what we need to provide in terms of the case for urgency. It's likely that that without substantial action by the legislature, the situation that has been rooted in many years of issues, not just the pandemic, is likely to worsen. A closure of any one of these campuses carries substantial costs. And not only does it carries actual direct costs of closing the campus, of dealing with the students that are currently enrolled and what happens to them. There's an expectation that you would presumably sell the real estate that's available, but that won't happen immediately. And in the meantime, there will be considerable closing costs. All of this estimates that we've been able to determine is significant enough that it may account for roughly 1/6 of the total system-wide budget in the most optimistic scenario, and considerably more beyond that if you also account for the fact that closing a campus likely means the loss of revenue from tuition and other services provided in the process. So there's a real clear need to act, and I think that's one of the things you'll like to see in the next version of the report that we'll release that the Select Committee will put forward in February. Senator Bruce mentioned criteria for the students in the state. I'll just outline some of the ones that are in the report that the Select Committee has come up with through a pretty thoughtful and engaged process. The idea that the state colleges should become more student-centered, that the solution should address the sort of persistent affordability concerns that exist in the state, and in the state colleges in particular, that the results should lead to greater access to workforce relevant programs for all types of students, including adults located throughout the state, and that those type of programs aren't just separate programs, but they involve the creation of more workforce relevant skills development and experiential opportunities, even for the liberal arts programs that are present in BCS institutions already. Ultimately, it should result in fiscal sustainability, and need to rely on greater coordination and collaboration in both the academic and the administrative functional areas of the system. And that's the set of criteria that led the select committee to adopt recommendations and put forward recommendations that you've seen in the December report. And I'll go into those real quickly. The first one is around restructuring. And under that recommendation, the select committee has argued that the Community College of Vermont be maintained as a separate institution focused on sub-baccalaureate programming. Let me back up a second. This restructuring should really have as a starting point the idea that the institutions that emerge from this restructuring will be assigned clear and relatively distinct mission statements that they are able to follow. So the part of that would be that the Community College of Vermont would focus exclusively on sub-baccalaureate programming, expanded to have a greater focus on workforce relevant education and training and services to adult learners in particular, including non-credit programming. The remaining three institutions, Castleton, Northern Vermont, and Vermont Tech, would be unified into a singly accredited organization with a single leadership structure, and in the process serving a mission to provide affordable and accessible baccalaureate level education, limited master's programming in areas where the need for such programs is geographically dispersed. So you need teachers in all throughout the state, and you are likeliest to find them among the populations that already live there. So providing a master's program in education to southeastern Vermont, let's say, is a sensible thing for an institution to that has its support in the Northeast Kingdom should provide. And then, in addition, some limited technical sub-baccalaureate credentials, such as the type that Vermont Tech already provides, in partnership with CCV as a way to create greater efficiencies there. The restructuring would include improvements in administrative coordination and the sharing, in particular, the sharing of academic programs. One of the key changes that the system is being encouraged to pursue is the idea that as the enrollment levels have declined and fiscal conditions have declined, the institutions and some of their departments have shrunk to the point where quality becomes an issue. Part of the solution to addressing the need for providing access to quality programs involves the sharing of academic programs across these, what are currently independent institutions, via a mixture of program modalities, whether that's some online instruction, some mixed with some face-to-face instruction, with adequate student support programs, as well as some other more innovative approaches like periodic on-campus experiences, limited residency, that kind of thing. And so that will be a significant change, and one that the institutions are likely to need to do regardless. And we think that it makes the most sense and is the most efficient strategy to coordinate that across a singly accredited institution, where the leadership structure can make those changes more aggressively and help them stick. That's the first recommendation. The second recommendation relates, sure.
Okay, I just want to, regarding first recommendation, any questions or comments before we move on? No, okay, I just wanted to ask, to do a single accreditation, are there fiscal advantages to that as well?
We believe that coordinate, yes, we believe that putting in the longer term, putting the institutions together will have some cost savings, and we have some evidence from other institutional consolidations that suggest that is likely the case. Now, whether they turn into actual savings or reinvestment opportunities in
Right,
student
well,
success.
sure, yeah, understand that.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
And which is not to say that it doesn't come without costs or without challenges, right? I mean, it would It would take some time. It would have some costs in terms of trying to create the project infrastructure to move that effort forward, which is why in the third recommendation we talk about the need for the state to help support and stimulate the transformational activities that are needed. The other questions? Yes.
Oh,
Senator
yeah, back
Bowman.
in. Yep. Senator Ballant.
Yeah, hi. In terms of the section C, talking about really trying to serve students of all different types, including working adults and underrepresented, population. I'm wondering, to what extent did you look at how incumbent workers, working adults right now as a student population, what's the percentage of those students on the campuses now? I'm just wondering, when you talk about expanding, have you thought about a target for what that population would look like in order to make it financially feasible?
Yes, we have talked a little bit about that, and let me take this sort of in some kind of hopefully sensible order. The proportion of student enrollments among adults is largest at CCV, and to a slightly lesser extent, Vermont Tech. But among the other institutions, there is much more predominantly a traditional age student population direct from high school, residentially based students. And the Vermont Tech, and I think to a lesser extent CCV, they also offer programs, or they coordinate services for adults in the workforce right now that are not captured in most data. And in fact, Vermont, our sense of Vermont is that there is not a clear sense of the degree to which non-credit and customizable training programs and other things like that are actually being carried out throughout the state, because it's so heavily decentralized and not particularly well funded. So we are continuing to try to gather information and refine recommendations around that particular area. But we do think that between Vermont Tech and CCV, there's a real need for real attention to, and in expanded, there is already some, but an expanded attention to reaching that population of individuals. Now, on the last point, the last question you had, we do have some data in the report that probably makes sense to discuss under that third recommendation that suggests there would be some additional tuition revenue to be reaped from better outreach to populations not currently being well served. But with the data being what they are, it's what we've done is we've tried to say it wouldn't take an awful lot of additional outreach to generate some tuition revenue to help close some of those structural deficits that the system is experiencing.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, so we'll go on to recommendation number 2, I guess. That's where we stopped.
The second recommendation, thank you very much. The second recommendation is that the system should move aggressively to coordinate administrative service operations. This is an area where I don't think that there's really there's likely to be really any disagreement from various sources that more efficiency can be gained on the administrative side within the system itself, and even the labor task force has suggested improvements in that regard. The points of disagreement is how to actually carry that out, and in our case, we've argued that it's not necessary. And I think this has so far been somewhat of a misperception of the recommendation that the select committee has put forward. We are not advocating for a substantial increase in the chancellor's office size. We are, however, recommending that the chancellor's office move aggressively forward with the support of the board to ensure that process gets rolling and proceeds speedily. The coordination of administrative services does not necessarily mean centralizing all those functions under the leadership of the chancellor in an office in Montpelier. Instead, it means that for example, a function like financial aid services, the policies and procedures to be used around making sure that compliance is sorted out, that students get their funds, et cetera, can be coordinated. And if expertise exists at Castleton to carry that task out and to create the leadership for how that gets done, then that can happen at Castleton.
Mm-hmm.
Students at NVU will still need access to a financial aid counselor. Now they can get that through online engagements where there's a person in an office in Linden and in Johnson to actually meet with students about their financial aid needs. But that person is a frontline individual. They're not creating policy or implementing policy in a different way from what's going on across the system. And that same approach can be used across an array of administrative services, generally speaking. I think that it's fair to say that the board, our experience is that the board and the chancellor's office is moving forward in some areas with regard to that. They have to, and it's going. It's not easy to do it. They did it around payroll. I think last year that did not proceed smoothly. So one of the key elements we're talking about here is the real need for effective and professional project management. There are really, I think, high quality people in the chancellor's office and scattered around the system, but they have many, many tasks on hand and they're not necessarily trained project management folks. So we're arguing that in order to get better outcomes and better transformation, there needs to be resources to support the acquisition of really good project management services to carry out these kinds of consolidations.
Okay.
Any questions
That's
on that one?
recommendation number 2.
Yes.
Okay. Senator Ballant.
Not so much a question as a comment. I think it's really unfortunate that the consolidation of the payroll went so roughly, because it just didn't instill a lot of confidence about additional consolidation of services going forward. I just want to sort of state the obvious that we're not building on something that works smoothly, and there's still a lot of hard feelings around that. So it's a challenge.
On the other hand, we know, or at least I know from faculty in my area, that there was a lot of animosity toward the chancellor's office, and just get rid of it, save money, give it all back to us, make the world go back, etc. So in some ways, this proposal to look at this more distributive kind of administrative function, assuming that where it's lodged can implement it well across the system, helps kind of mitigate that those feelings that the chancellor's office and administration is growing and at our expense, which I'm sure you picked up. It was certainly a very strong message that we were, for those of us who live in the areas where these colleges are located, we're certainly hearing.
And our sense is that project management activities, it sounds basic, right? But it really requires a unique set of skills and capacities that are not necessarily, they can be kind of uncommon, and they're not necessarily going to be something that somebody can take on the side of an existing full-time array of jobs. So it is a cost to try to help transform the system. In order to coordinate these administrative functions, there's a cost associated with doing that effectively and well, and in a way that sort of addresses the concerns that the payroll experience created.
Okay. So if no more questions, we'll go on to the next recommendation.
The third recommendation is probably the one that you're, as appropriators, you're most interested in. This is the one that talks about strategic funding of the system overall, and it includes the substantial additional ask for funding resources to support the transformational activity outlined in this report, that start to be outlined in this report, and for which there will be more work to be done as this select committee continues its work. But also, we should be mindful, and this is an area where we at Enchins are trying to be clear, but also members of the select committee, that the job of the board is really where a lot of this work is going to get carried out. Excuse me, in the chancellor's office or at the direction of the board. And so what's clear is that there's the opportunity to create this change is clear and present, that the pandemic has created a whole bunch of additional costs. And of course, the legislature has been generous in trying to help the system sort of manage the current fiscal year with help from the CARES Act. But as it goes forward to try to put the system on good financial footing, there is a timeline. This isn't going to happen overnight. And the idea that's represented in this transformation is that the legislature or the state would provide substantial additional resources in the upcoming fiscal year. And I'm quite aware that the state budget situation that you all are going to have to be wrestling with as you go forward. But that the funding support to allow for this transformation to happen will be required. And the way in which the sort of the ask is structured is that there's more money requested on the front end, and as the system is able to find cost savings or savings they can redirect towards improved affordability, the subsequent years the money requested from the legislature would go down. Paired with this, I should probably mention, is this idea that we have not found a clear articulation of what the state wants out of its state college system. The select committee has done a bunch of work to sort of outline that. That's sort of in the criteria, sort of mixed into the criteria for recommendations. But in order to know what you're paying for, lacking a clear awareness exactly of what you're paying for has sort of led to a sort of, we're going to provide $30 million a year to the state colleges, and hopefully we'll go forward from that, but tuitions have generally gone up. So we in addition to the transformational request, there is a request to provide some additional funds to support affordability concerns. As I think you probably are all aware, Vermont is the state in the union that is far and away expects the most funding support for its public institutions to come from tuition revenue than any other in the country.
I thought New Hampshire was be worse.
It's now it's like 87% for Vermont and about 82 or somewhere between 80 and 82 or thereabouts for New Hampshire. But you all are sort of in regular competition.
I know. I always used to get a little consolation. we were really bad, but our neighbor to the east. Okay.
Can I just point out that
yes,
two things. First of all, we have the lowest birth rate in the nation, except for New Hampshire. So we got that going for us. And then the second thing is, I spoke with Senator Campion about, you'll see in the report, to connect with what Brian just said, it asks that essentially we draft some language for Title 16 that lays out what the state wants from its state college system. And Brian seemed receptive to that. So as the committee puts together kind of final report recommendations, I've told Brian that I'll bring those ideas to him. And I don't think, Brian, that anybody anticipates a lot, but maybe where there are now 2 paragraphs, maybe a page and a half of guidance.
One of the, you had used it and looking at the system where in fact efficiencies that then free up money that can be reinvested or help support the transformation. What about on the, well, setting aside tuition increases, other ways of looking at revenue generation? And the example is we have a very aggressive Southern New Hampshire university, and they actually have gone into Vermont high schools. They're credentialing Vermont teachers, and they are, moving very quickly. And of course, those students are the ones that you want to create the pipeline, or if in fact we want to make a better pipeline, so to speak, to our state college system. Did that come up in your deliberations, in the extent to which maybe the state college system's lunch is being eaten because of this very aggressive, academic entity that is right at our doorstep, and in fact has gone in and marketed services to our own high schools? So we're using public resources at one level that in fact might work at cross purposes for the support of higher education. I just was wondering if that was part of your examination.
Yeah, I think that we didn't spend a ton of time on the competitive environment that the state colleges are in, because it's well understood that kind of behavior from Southern New Hampshire is happening, but it's not just them, it's a whole array. I mean, the part of the country that you're in is saturated with, with institutions. They're all facing the same demographic picture. And a few of them have figured out how to try to transform themselves in ways that are in keeping with the kind of academic programs and opportunities that appeal to populations that are there, including adults. So the idea that the Vermont State Colleges can carry on as they have been, serving primarily, not exclusively, but at least at NVU and Castleton, primarily residential traditional age students from a dwindling pool in an increasingly populated market, with a wide array of programs that are duplicative, doesn't work. And increasingly there needs to be an approach that is more contemporary and competitive, that involves, I think, the leveraging of the good resources that exist in new ways across the enterprise, including programs that are offered in theater or meteorology at Linden that can be consumed by students attending at Castleton or wherever. And the key is to ensure that that's set up in a way that works, but creating the transformative change is going to be difficult. And in SNHU is not going away.
No.
So.
Okay, Senator Starr.
Yeah, seeing that we fund our high schools and our public education schools very well, maybe we could incentivize our high schools by, if they send X number of students to the state college system, they get an extra percentage of some type in state aid, so that our money that we push to them will come back to us in the state college system as students. I think we ought to put a little muscle on them. If Southern New Hampshire can go in and pick up students and they aren't putting in any money into the high school, we ought to be able to muscle our way in, and seeing we're giving them this money, we ought to increase their efforts in sending their students to our state college system.
Oh,
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
We might get some pushback from UVM, who would want to be in on the deal, but
Well, let them in too. I think that would be fair.
Okay, so I'm just looking. I don't see any other hands. I'm sorry, Senator Sears.
I've been pretty silent today.
Well, are you okay?
Oh no, I'm fine. I just it's just trying to be silent and not say something about everything. But I just can't keep my mouth shut the entire meeting. I get, and maybe it's been covered in the discussion, but it worries me about the state of college higher education in this nation, not just at state university, the state college system, but throughout the nation. And particularly here in the Northeast. I mean, we lost Southern Vermont College here in Bennington. And are we rescuing something that is, unless it completely transforms itself, is not going to be the Southern New Hampshire University I see advertised all the time on television down here. The North Adams State, what used to be North Adams State, now it's the North Adams, I think, College of Liberal Arts. Those are drawing a lot of my constituents' kids. And I'm just wondering if, what is the outlook for higher education in some of these smaller schools? And we've seen so many of them, they're all private, to be sure. But we've seen so many of them close around New England. It's not just a Vermont problem. And I understand that that we can talk about the little bit that we put towards that, the 89% of the funding has to come from other sources than the state. But even if it was changed to 75%, is it going to work? I guess that's my question.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Presuming that's addressed to me.
Yes, I think it probably is.
Yeah.
Brian.
Yeah.
I think that it's a good question. The answer to it, I would say, is that with the limited data that we are able to access, the graduates of the Vermont State College system are generally coming from Vermont in much larger numbers than students attending UVM or otherwise. And they're more likely to stay in Vermont than graduates from UVM or Mill Valley or whatever. They also tend to be the students who are more marginal in terms of the degree to which they're likely to enroll, direct from high school or as adults. UVM is a quality institution, but it serves generally a much more traditional age student population from around the region and across the nation. VSC, Northern Vermont University, serves students who likely would not attend college in the absence of having a presence up there in the Northeast Kingdom. Yep. Which is why we've encouraged the select committee, and I think that it didn't require a ton of encouragement on our part, to ensure that one of the criteria is that students from all parts of the state are able to access a quality higher education experience. And when you have a presence that the state assets is already there, the question, I think, the obvious thing to do is to try to leverage it the most effective way. 20 or 30 years from now, I would expect that if you rescue these institutions, they will remain as thriving institutions. I think that there's more work in our report to be done on how these institutions are economic engines of their communities beyond just being employment centers. But together with UVM and other state investments, help to bring individuals back into Vermont who might otherwise be leaving the state. That's a really tough task that's maybe on the marginal edges of the select committee's charge. But I think that it goes hand in hand with the criteria that they've laid out that says a presence in these places is important. And it's important not just because they are often the biggest employer in the area, paying the best wage or paying above average wages. There's actually an intent to try to leverage these institutions for and I think it's fair to say that they, in making these statements, I don't want to imply that they aren't an economic multiplier. They are, but I think that they are the key or at least part of the solution to trying to change the futures. And so, but 45 years from now, it's higher education is certainly undergoing a change driven by places like SNHU, by new technologies, and in fact, what the select committee's recommendations are saying is we ought to, as a set of institutions, organize ourselves to take advantage of those similar opportunities for outreach, for engagement, and for impact.
Hey, Senator Sears is thinking ahead, 40 years out.
Well, I'm not going to be in this position 40 years from now.
That
But
remains to be
it's-
seen.
Well, but it's it's encouraging to hear that you have confidence that they can survive if reconstrued, and that we're not just throwing money away by trying to have a bridge to the future.
Mhm.
Given what's happened at higher education around particularly New England, I'll just stick with New England right now.
Nationwide.
Well, but it's been more New England, smaller colleges closing, and the Boston Globe did a number of stories about colleges and closing.
Yeah. I think Senator Baruth and then Senator Westman.
Yeah, I just wanted to speak to Dick's question quickly and then say something about the money side of it. I do think Brian makes an excellent point. All the research shows that if people go to school in Vermont, we're likelier to retain them. It's an information economy. So if we're not providing the higher ed, for instance, if we had 3 campuses closed, people will have to go to get their higher ed somewhere else.
Or they
And
don't get it.
Right, where they don't get it, and they will be lower paying jobs that they inhabit if they have jobs at all, or they'll be moving out of state. So we would be compounding the problems that we have demographically. In terms of the money, I don't want to sugarcoat one piece of the report, and that is there's a table that lays out the projected needs over the next 5 years. And then later in the report, it calls for the state of Vermont to identify a funding source, a permanent funding source, in addition to what we've been supplying for general fund dollars. And that's how you get to that more sustainable piece. Now that's a fraught discussion, but I don't want to make it seem as though this isn't built on that ground. When we talk about sustainability, where we talk about those 3 campuses remaining where they are, it presumes that the general fund contribution remain at least the same, and that there be an identified source added to that. So the committee in its wisdom could figure out all sorts of ways to get to that, but that's what it's all built on.
Okay. And you have, of course, advanced the proceeds from the sale of marijuana.
Wasn't going to say that, but
But I'll say it for you. Senator Westman, you had a comment or question?
yeah.
The comment was that the student that you described that drive to school that stayed is exactly where I was almost 40 years ago. And the mission of the school always centered around that. In the report, the feeling in some places is that the system as a whole has drifted away from that, and that drift has put more pressure on the system itself and created less buy-in to the system. And and so I hope the report and what comes out in February will put a highlight on how we, as we appropriate money, can continue to shine the light on that particular area, because that's where we need to concentrate our efforts. So how do we put the money in to make sure that that focus remains on that group?
We're, the term social justice came up numerous times as it relates to providing access to Vermont kids who otherwise wouldn't really go on to higher education. But all this discussion really brings home how compartmentalized in some ways our discussions have been relative to higher ed and what it means, because we always look at economic development and how we import people to the state, and yet at the same time failing to say, how do we develop and how do we provide the opportunities for the kids that are already here, and how do we assure that access to the higher ed, whether it's a degree or sometimes certificate programs, and how to make it affordable. And so I see some of the techniques that fall within the typical economic development sphere totally disconnected from the investments and the value and the role that our state colleges should play in that workforce development, in that keeping our young people here, increasing skills, and providing that kind of geographic access to educational services. And when we get into our committees, we get, the Agency of Commerce and Community Development, and they've got their toolbox, and it's all focused on employers. And I think we've got to really focus on broadening that discussion, that there are other ways of looking at these challenges to the state, whether it's our demographics or our workforce or whatever, and make sure that we're not just sort of myopic about it, which I think, maybe back to Senator Westman's comment, is the way in which a lot of this has been done. It's not under my committee purview, so I'm going to focus on the departments or the agencies that are my policy areas, and not think about the kind of the larger systems. So I'm hoping that this whole discussion will broaden a perspective around the role of this publicly funded investment in higher education. In fact, has very significant impacts on the economy and business, and the well-being of the state, which I think historically has perhaps not gotten the attention that it needs. So Senator Ballant, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what you just said, Madam Chair. It's something I've been thinking about a lot, having served on education and also having taught at 3 different rural K-8 schools. You can identify pretty easily those kids who are going to graduate from high school and never go on to do any additional training or certification. And we have got to do a better job. We do a great job, Senator Bruce, as you well know, we do a great job graduating students with very high rate of graduation, but it's that section of kids who never go on to do anything. And we know, as you said, it speaks to economic development, it speaks to workforce, but it also speaks to like the health of families in these rural communities when they don't have a ladder to that next good paying job. And I do think Vermont State College is a critical part of that.
Sorry.
Senator Westman, then Senator Baruth.
Or it's just, they have the ability to do it, they have the, but they don't have the family behind them that can push them to do it. And because that school was closed, that was my case exactly. And my life is better because the Johnson campus was there for me in that. So I'm interested in putting money in, but I'm interested in making sure that when I put that money in, that's where we laser focus the money. So I really need some help thinking about how do I create that that connection between my money's going in to help those kids and help those families move ahead.
And I think that ties into Senator Sears, and we do it in such a way that we're building future fiscal sustainability, and not simply maintaining sort of the status quo. So there's a lot of thinking and a lot of work ahead. Senator Baruth, you had another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Bobby's point, because the more I think about it, the more sense it makes. I did an event with Senator Ash and the rest of the Chittenden delegation at Milton High School, and very big high school. And we went from group of them to group of them, and we had about 20 minutes with each group. And so I talked to 500 kids that day, I think, a big number of kids. And my first question to all of them was, do you plan to use the dual enrollment program that the state has set up for you? It's about $5,000 worth of college credits that's basically in the bank for you. All you have to do is ask for it. And 0 of them were planning to take advantage of it. But to Bobby's point, if the high school had an incentive where sending kids to dual enrollment, sending them to the state colleges accrued to their benefit, all those kids would be hit up with that proposition. Same way free and reduced lunch, they go aggressively to have people fill out the forms because they get the money for that. So I'm going to talk with Senator Campion about what incentives could we provide. That could be even a side bill, but it seems like a good direction to go.
Yeah, because obviously it's not. We put those opportunities in place, but we haven't been able to realize the full potential of that. And so to me, it's just another way of connecting back to that to the state college system. We're kind of off on our own discussions, Brian.
That's okay.
Do you have other information? We got to recommendation 3. And then you really stimulated a lot of conversation. So
well, sometimes I do.
Do you have other presentation for us or testimony?
I think that's the core of what I wanted to say. I would go back and echo Senator Baruth's encouragement from about 10 minutes ago that if there are questions regarding the schedule of payments that we included in the report, which I think Chrissy could put on the screen if that's helpful. I want to make sure that if you have any questions about that, then I answer them. But this illustrates that that there's a structural deficit at the Vermont State Colleges, that it's substantial and it's grown. A big chunk of it is largely due to costs incurred from COVID. But even after that, there remains a substantial structural deficit that's far larger than it was even a couple of fiscal years ago. And that this table suggests that the transformational experience that VSC needs to embark upon is going to yield reductions. We've guesstimated that it's possible to create reductions of $5 million per year over the next several years until the structural deficit is eliminated, with the help of funding from the state. That's pretty significant. And to Senator Westman's point a little bit, we did talk about the need to address the size of the physical footprint at the Vermont State Colleges. There are a number of buildings that are largely underutilized or they're obsolete. Renovating them is not likely to yield additional revenue and come at some cost. So there, unlike most capital expenditures, this includes the idea that you get some savings from not having the carrying costs of utilities and securing spaces that are not likely to be effectively used in the future. So we've suggested that some of these savings that the Vermont State Colleges can realize relatively quickly is by figuring out which of the buildings they currently own may need to be eliminated from their inventory, either through removing them altogether or leasing them out to some partner, as Vermont Tech and NBU have been trying to do. But at any rate, there is a little bit of detail about focusing the kind of investment the state's being asked to make here, in particular around the physical footprint component of this.
And I think I've heard that they're working on that now, of divesting of some of that property, or so it seems like they're moving quite quickly in that area. Okay, we've seen this summary before, and obviously this is going to be a point of a lot of discussion as we go through the appropriations process. Senator Westman. And I would like to say the pinnacle of your success and the investment that you got through the state college system is reflected in your appointment to this committee.
Oh, great. So the new federal bill that just passed, the COVID bill, directs, I think, 12 or 14 million to the state colleges and 10 or so to the university. Will we have some idea of how that affects all of these numbers?
I think joint fiscal will help us on that.
Yeah, well, yes.
So I think that in this table, we've assumed, and I think we put this together while we did it in advance of the December meeting, when there was I don't think there had been any discussion about any meaningful discussion in Congress about actual.
This doesn't include any, at the time, the idea was that these numbers would be brought down by any.
I'm not particularly saying these numbers. I'm saying that if we get further upgrades on this report in February, will that be factored in?
I have honestly, I'll be honest, I haven't had time to really look at that, but I think that it makes sense for us to try to include that information where it's clear enough for us to make sense of it. Yes.
That was my understanding, was the FY 2020, 2022 numbers were where they are now, with the idea that it was dependent on what came from the feds.
Right.
So those numbers.
So they do not anticipate that revenue,
Right.
which can help on the demand on the state side, I think is what you're saying.
That's exactly what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
All right. Other comments or questions? I'm just looking. We've it's around 3, so I just thought I would ask.
Bobby's got a question.
Yeah.
Okay, Bobby.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm
Bobby.
wondering, sometime in the near future, we should talk with Michael in economic development in regards to the state training grants and all that money that he disperses. Try to coordinate that with this to some degree, so that the colleges get in on this training as much as possible to help them earn money, or our own money, but it would go in a different, a little different form. And I think Michael would be very willing to cooperate and try to push that in this direction, as long as we got to him soon enough.
Well, don't forget, we already went to the Vermont training program to look as a potential funding source to match, to support nursing programs that are administered through the state college system. So that's an example of, I think, what you're talking about, to leverage that money. In this case, because we can get the Medicaid match, then it really helps add more into the system. But that,
Well, the
that is
meat cutting,
yeah, well,
program is, it's just floundering along.
I know. And the Vermont training program was created with a real focus on supporting employers. And so this is getting back to kind of relooking at investments in the system and how we, what might have been a good use 20 years ago, we may want to assess. Other
Right.
comments or questions for Brian or Senator Ruth?
Before Brian leaves, I just wanted to say, sometimes you hire people and they're not good at their jobs. NCHEMS has been fantastic, very professional, very nimble. They, as Brian said, they've been operating on 3 or 4 fronts simultaneously, public comment, as well as crunching the numbers and coming up with the report itself. So everybody that I know on the select committee has been extremely pleased with their work. So,
Yep.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you very much for that.
That's good. And we do appreciate your being available to us on really pretty short notice. Unless there are other questions, I am going to move on and we can let Brian
Get back
go
to
back
work.
to whatever you were. And you're in Boulder, you said?
Well, it's too expensive to live in Boulder for people in nonprofits, but I live in Lafayette, not far from Boulder, about 8 miles.
Oh, my son was in Fort Collins, which is a little further north,
Yes.
and but that whole Front Range is just, oh,
Yep, it's lovely.
yeah. But there's no open prairie left.
Not very much, no.
No.
And the traffic to get in and out of the mountains is gradually getting worse. There aren't a lot of roads you can put through those tiny spaces.
No, down
Probably no.
Yeah, and they had that huge washout too through the canyon. Yeah. Oh, well, okay, thank you. And committee, I just want to touch base tomorrow. Thank you, Brian.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Brian.
I'll work with Stephanie around how to give us a draft on just trying to get some of this stuff cleaned up and resolved and move forward in light of the fact that we aren't getting a budget adjustment anytime this week. There's certain things I think we can just say we want to do it and move it forward.
Yep.
And I know that Senator Westman and others have raised questions about the conversations the treasurer is having and so forth. And if Senator Ballant maybe can give us a quick update tomorrow as well. Are there other areas that the committee would like to do, since we've got this time available before we start, before we have the budget adjustment to work on? So Senator Ruth.
I've still been curious about, I think it's 10 to 30 million in CRF that now with the date extended, there were reconsiderations about where the money would go. Will we have a unit on that somehow?
Yeah, we will, in terms of what is out there and whether it be reallocated. The other question is that 127 million that's now going into K through 12, and how does that fit? How will that money flow? And ultimately, there's no question that there's a desire to use these funds in a way to reduce that 9-cent tax rate increase that, that first letter would suggest. We knew that was the high because it had just assumed every budget would go through the way it is, and no offsets for some of the CRF money that went in. So we will be taking a look at that in terms of whether more of that with the extension on time, in fact, could be spent for K through 12. And we're going to certainly, if there's money that we did not obligate in broadband before December 20th, I think committees will be discussing how the remainder would go out. There's obviously a lot of discussion around satellite versus, the line extension, and that'll probably tie into discussions next door. I think that We just need to get an update in terms of where we are in terms of what has been allocated. And now with the federal extension for a year, will give us time to use it for the purposes that we allocated it. The other part, I guess, is that of understanding better the new money coming in and the extent, as I mentioned before, we can use those dollars to free up CRF, which are more flexible and allow us some capacity to use them in ways that advance Vermont goals. And the ultimate is we know that we can be using CRF dollars for payroll, for corrections and public safety and so forth. So the ultimate method to convert to general fund, which gives us the greatest flexibility, is also part of that discussion.
Mhm. Mhm.
Okay, I did see Stephanie was on, but then she left. Anyone from Joint Fiscal, Chrissy, there but you?
Nope, just me.
Well, you're pretty important, so we'll take you. So tomorrow, then we'll start at 1:30.
After the
Do you
floor.
think we'll be off the floor by then, Becca?
Oh,
I believe so. It's pretty straightforward in
Will we
terms
be
of the town
voting?
meeting.
Will we be voting on that bill tomorrow?
Yes, our expectation is to vote on it, get it through all stages of passage, get it to the governor, so there's no anxiety in the towns about town meeting.
So I'm, then I think what we'll do is we will then meet at the fall of the gavel. So if we're done, and it tends to, if it's a little bit later or a little bit earlier, we'll just let that be controlling.
yeah.
Anything else for today? Otherwise, we'll call it a day. This has been an easier day. I've said we've got to give ourselves breaks because yesterday after, I don't know, 7 hours,
Day.
it was just, it's just exhausting. So,
I totally agree. It was yesterday was, I don't know how many more of those days we can.
And
we
actually,
can, Chrissy, we can go offline now. We've finished the business of